So hey guys, this is Raymond again, and this is the second video for the series on sports, the sports aspect of Filipino martial arts. And today what we're going to talk about, different ways we do sparring, right? And why it's important to distinguish between the two, all right, for our self-development. So last time we talked about how, what do you call this, sparring or sports in martial arts is the bridge between the techniques that you know and applying it in real life, in real self-defense, in real dueling situations. The bridge that you have is sports, basically, right? So in this small arena of sports, there are a lot of things that can happen as well. There are many different ways of doing sports, right? So there are two major ways. Number one is competition. When I talk about competition, we're talking about honest to God going to an area, to a tournament. You pay your tournament fee if there's a tournament fee. There's a set of rules that you study. Everybody agrees to do that, and you're competing against people from other clubs. That's the best thing about sports competition. You're fighting against people from other clubs, not just people from your own club. Now, I want to compare that or juxtapose that to just sparring with your club mates, right? Now, why is that a huge difference? I think there's a huge difference when you do that, right? Because sometimes you feel like when you're in your club and you're sparring with your club mates and you're going at it like full force, hammer and tongs, you're like, rah, you have the sense that it feels realistic, or it feels like, yeah, those sports competitions that I see online, the videos that I've seen, it's going to be exactly like this, right? Actually, no. All right. And if you're treating them exactly the same way, I would suggest you need to revamp how you think so that your training and your training experience will improve. What do I mean? Now, when you're training with your friends or you're sparring with your friends at your club, right? Yes, you want to win. Yes, you're applying techniques in a non-choreographed, full force manner. That's great, right? But you're also trying to learn. So in this case, the sports aspect is being used to help people learn, right? So when you're doing that, that's the time when you experiment with all of your techniques, right? Like for example, the instructor just gave you a new technique, super interesting, but you're not 100% sure how to apply it yet. That's when you apply it, when you're sparring with your teammates. Now, when you're competing in an actual honest-to-God competition, in an honest-to-God tournament, the tone changes a little bit, right? The objective is no longer to learn, but the objective is to win, right? So at this point, very few people, anyone who's worth their salt, is really not experimenting anymore. Experimentation was done months ago. When we were training, I would experiment with all the techniques I need to use so that on competition day, I know what works, what doesn't work for me, right? So it's different for every person, but I know my capabilities. I know how fast I can go. I know how hard I can push myself before I start slowing down. I know a lot by the time I enter competition, right? And as I mentioned, you're there to win. Now, how does this help us? What's the big point? Yes, there are two different things. What's the big point? My idea is don't conflate the two whenever you're training or whatever, because that really, really messes up your development as a martial artist. Like I've met some guys who would be in their training hall sparring with their, club mates or teammates or whatever, and then they're going full force, and that's all right. You should be going full force if that's the objective. But they're always using what we call the bread and butter techniques, techniques that you know will work, right? So these guys are using only that. If you're treating your sparring sessions at the club that way, that you're really, really, truly trying really hard to win, and you're not experimenting, you're not trying to learn, I think you're diminishing the effect of learning from that place, or the effect of sparring with your teammates, right? My position is, if you're joining a tournament and you're a participant of the tournament, It's part of your job to game the system. What does that mean? That means you look for any kind of loophole, any kind of thing that will give you an advantage. That doesn't mean cheating, exactly, but you do whatever it takes to win, and it even means taking advantage of the rule set. Right now, I've seen some guys do this. Right, in a competition, just to give you guys some example, in a competition, you're fighting, competing, and then in some rule sets, you're not allowed to hit the spine, right? Because of safety concerns, right? These are old safety concerns. Back in the day when a lot of guys did a lot of boxing. So in boxing, you can't hit the spine, you can't hit the kidney because it's dangerous. They apply the same rule in Arnis, right? So in a lot of, especially in a lot of the older Arnis, I think in most Arnis sports or sports organizations, hitting the spine is not allowed. So what do? I know some guys who would actually present their spine just to make sure that the opponent doesn't do it. So if he's fighting the guy, right, he goes boom, he hits the guy right in the head and turns around, presents his spine, right? So any guy who's really used to countering straight ahead, he suddenly can't counter because he's not allowed to hit the spine. If he does hit the spine, he can get a foul, right? Now, is that realistic? Not at all. It's not what you want to do in a real fight, right? When you hit someone, boom, you don't want to present to him your spine, right? But that's what you do in a competition. You look at the rules and you try to game it, right? And that's your objective in a competition, to win the medal, all right? So some other things that I've seen. What are the weird things that I've seen? Oh, this is a classic. One of the old rules in Arnis is that, this was from years ago, that if a player falls down, the judge will immediately stop the fight, let the player stand up, let them go back to their starting line, and then let the fight happen again, right? Reasonable, right? Some guys started gaming that. What they would do is they would do what we used to call the suicide shot, where they would really just jump as far as they can, hit their opponent, and just splat on the floor. The moment they hit the floor, because of the rules and the training, the judges or the referees would go stop and let him back up. The thing is, they keep doing that so that there's nothing else would happen in the fight other than him going hit and fall to the floor. If he made it, then he gets the point. If he doesn't make it, then he doesn't get the point. But the fight still stops. The opponent doesn't have a chance to fight him back. A lot of people got really annoyed with that. To be fair, I was kind of annoyed with that, only in the sense that I didn't figure it out first. Like, oh wow, these guys saw something in the rule set that I didn't know was there. After that, they quickly plugged that particular loophole that the Judges Association was like, no, we can't have this. This is too far from what Arnis is, right? But anyway, so that's what happens. You game the rules, and that really changes how you play. Now, what I've noticed is when it comes to tournament fighting, there are a lot of difference between tournament fighting and learning. In tournament fighting, people are more physically fit. Like the conditioning level, like people, since there's a set date, right? People are training for that for months prior, right? Like they're training really hard for it. They do their peaking. For anyone who's familiar with the concept, there's the concept of peaking, where you're at your peak cardiovascular performance, peak strength, peak power output for what you have right now, right? So it's normally, I think it depends on the sport, but for me, I use a 3-month cycle of a hypertrophy, power, and then skills in that progression. Very interesting. But there, people are normally super fit by the time they go in competition. In school sparring, not as fit. I mean, you're not always ripped. You're not always, beach body ready. So you have to train with that. When you're in competition, keep in mind you're in a competition. So compete, right? Play with the rules, do whatever, and let the judges figure it out. If you're training in your training hall with your friends and you're there to learn, then learn.